Ontario. BLG is very pleased to be hosting the 2018 Life Science Public Policy Forum. In recent years, LSO has emerged as one of, if not the most important, advocate for life science public policy in Canada. In part, this is because of the tremendous leadership team that LSO has assembled, who are seen by policymakers as well-informed, thoughtful, and balanced. It is also because of you, the members and supporters, who bring a diversity of perspectives to issues on which LSO is advocating. It is that diversity of perspectives, a holistic view of the sector, and its importance to Ontario and Canada as a whole, that distinguishes LSO from every other stakeholder interested in Canadian life sciences public policy. I hope that each of you enjoys today and takes full advantage to bring to the discussions your important perspective of the future of our sector. Now, please join me in welcoming to the podium LSO's rock star President and CEO, Dr. Jason Field.
You have obviously never heard me sing. It's not pretty. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at what I think is the favorite event of policy wonks, myself included, everywhere, the annual LSO Policy Forum. Every fall, we gather at this event to discuss and debate life sciences policies in Ontario with leaders from across academia, industry, and the public sector. Our focus has always been on not just talking about the issues and challenges that face our sector, but what are the solutions that we can advance and put forward. Today's discussion and the recommendations that we collectively put forward will be captured in a report that will be published in the new year. These annual policy reports are available on our website, and hard copies are mailed out to key decision makers across government. Moreover, these reports serve to document the evolution of life sciences policy in Ontario and help to guide LSO's advocacy throughout the rest of the year. All of this is to say that your participation today is important and it is meaningful. This year also marked a political transition for the province of Ontario, as we well know. For the first time in 15 years, we have a new government. I always believe that with change comes both challenge and opportunity. And today we're going to discuss how our sector can align with the goals and vision of the new Ontario government, how we can speak the same language of job creation, red tape reduction, ending hallway medicine, and an Ontario that is truly open for business. The life sciences sector transcends political affiliation. Whether you are Conservative, Liberal, Green, or NDP, we all value economic and social prosperity for Ontario. And in this regard, life sciences is Ontario's greatest untapped opportunity. Many of you know that I believe our shared vision for Ontario should be the creation of a Made in Ontario global biotech success story. But to achieve this goal, we must collectively identify what these barriers are and the solutions to overcome them, and that's what today's event is all about. On the federal front, it's also been a very busy year in life sciences policy. My colleague from Innovative Medicines Canada, Pamela Freilich, is here. She can certainly attest to that. We've seen some positives and some not so positives in the federal space. The federal economic strategy tables have released their recommendations for health and biosciences in Canada, and we'll see a presentation of those recommendations later on today. But we've also seen much debate and outcry over the modernization of PMPRB. And then we also still have national pharmacare looming on the horizon. So we'll be touching on some of these topics through the sessions today and what it means for the province of Ontario. So my ask of you all today is to actively participate in today's sessions. These are meant to be a dialogue. This isn't just meant to be sitting here passively listening to panels. We want interaction, we want dialogue, we want questions. So we want to hear from all of you. I want to take a few moments just to say thank you to several organizations and individuals. An event like this does not come together by itself, so I want to start by thanking our organizing committee, our co-chairs Lauren Fisher and Ryan Wiley, and all the committee members that volunteered to help put this together. Please give a round of applause for our organizing committee. I also want to thank an incredible team that I have at LSO. In particular, I want to thank Brian Craig. Brian's at the back of the room there, and he's going to turn about 8 different shades of red as I point him out. And Sue Monroe at the front desk you've met. Sue's been behind the scenes with LSO for nearly 15 years, and she's retiring in less than 3 weeks, I believe. I'm still in complete denial over that. But if you could please give a round of applause to Brian, Sue, Rami, Samantha, the entire LSO staff. And in your packages today, you will also find an absolutely amazing sheet that I'm really proud of, and it's all of our sponsors. And this is incredible. When we look back at past years and the support that we've had, it's always been wonderful, but it continues to grow. And this year is really exceptional in terms of the support that we've gained. I'd like to thank all of our Policy Forum sponsors, specifically City of Toronto, Shift Health, University of Toronto, Scarborough, the Arts and Science Co-op program, Biomedica Diagnostics, our hosts, BLG and Jeff Graham, Biotalent Canada is here today as well, Vertex, Shire, Lilly, Merck, Acto, Takeda, Labtician Thea, and then all of our corporate sponsors that support us all throughout the year. Our platinum sponsors, Innovative Medicines Canada, Scientist Pharma, Sanofi, Brampton, and Alexion, as well as our gold sponsors, Taiho Pharma, Horizon Pharma, and our silver sponsors, E&Y, Town of Richmond Hill, and BDO. Please give a round of applause for all of our supporters. I'd like to now call to the podium our board chair, Mark Smithies, President and CEO of Labtician Thea, to say a few words. Mark?
Thank you, Jason. Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. How great is it to be here this morning? I felt a bit of electricity in the room this morning. I think this is because, as Jason described it, we're entering a new era in life sciences in Ontario and Canada. This is not just a political shift, but rather a reflection of the evolving life sciences sector. Ontario is now producing world-leading life sciences innovation, and we need to act now to ensure we are capturing the full potential of this timely opportunity. The news from GM yesterday underlines to me that our reliance on the traditional sectors is at our peril, and that life sciences has the most potential for this province in terms of company formation, job creation, and economic growth. And emblematic of this is the full breadth and depth of life sciences represented here in this room today. You are a reflection of the passion, innovation, and intelligence of the sector, our drive to achieve, to grow, to help, our optimism, and our spirit. And the exciting part in all of these voices, while focused on many different priorities, in all of these voices there is alignment. There is alignment that we need in the province of Ontario, a life sciences strategy. When we at LSO set out to build our life sciences strategy that we published last year, we spoke to representatives from international pharmaceutical companies to small Canadian startups, venture capital to incubators, health sciences, bioindustrial associations, companies, universities, and individuals. In our call for an Ontario life sciences strategy, every person, association, company, and organization we consulted with then and today contributed to that blueprint and urged us forward. A blueprint for an Ontario life sciences strategy built by the sector and government in partnership. Why? To provide the vision on where we need to go, for a strategy that creates alignment within government on the importance of life sciences, and for a strategy to help tell the world what Ontario has to offer, a leading jurisdiction with a vibrant life sciences sector. We have clear alignment and a thriving commitment of the sector. We have the LSO blueprint. We have the report from the Provincial Life Sciences Working Group with input from across the sector. We have the federal government and the recommendations for a health and biosciences strategy, and we have a provincial government and a premier and members of the legislature, seemingly from all parties. For the first time, they are listening. At our Queen's Park Day in September, our blueprint for a coordinated life sciences strategy was very well received by representatives from all parties. We have consensus among industry, academia, and across government that this is a much-needed plan. The time is now. The election is behind us. The new Conservative government has set out a clear vision, and the life sciences sector is well aligned to help them achieve this success. We can do it without a strategy. We are doing it. But to capture the full potential of this timely opportunity, we need a coordinated life sciences strategy, industry, academia, and government working together to build a robust life sciences sector that rivals anything in the world. I look forward to an excellent day of presentations and discussions on this and other related topics. Thank you for coming. Thank you for investing your time in this amazing day put on by Jason, a fantastic LSO staff, and an army of dedicated volunteers. Your work is so greatly appreciated. It's now over to you, the audience. Your participation is going to take this day from good to great. Let's get started with Ella Korets-Smith, the CEO of TO Health. Ella?
Excellent. Thank you very much. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jason, and the organizers. I was pleased to be part of the organizing committee for this event and make sure that we're all having fulsome discussions and what we come up with at the end of the day then gets put forward and shared more broadly, such that the messages that we all have to share actually get to the ears that we want them to get to. So without further ado, I just wanted to, perhaps I'll call up my panel, and then I can give you a few thoughts and words about TO Health, but I just want to make sure that these folks who are really the stars of this and not me are up here. So I'd like to welcome Tom Blackwell, Senior National Reporter with the National Post. Jason Lietaer, I should have asked you, Jason, how to say your name, I'm so sorry. President of Enterprise Canada, Ashley Challinor, Vice President of Policy, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and Michelle Noble, Executive Director, Council of Academic Hospitals of Ontario. Please join me over here. Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally butchered that one.
No, you didn't.
Okay. Thank you. So this is going to be a little funny. I feel like I need to stand like in front of the podium because otherwise it'll be turning around to see me. Or I can go and sit down there somewhere. Yeah, I know, right? Like it's a bit. Yeah. So how about this? For those of you who don't know, TO Health is an all-stakeholder platform to promote the Toronto region as a place to invest in health sciences. We're founded by the Board of Trade in 2014 or so, spun out in 2016, and are now an independent non-for-profit that does two things: create cohesion locally and raise profile globally for the Toronto region. So we're trying to get more investment here, we're trying to get more eyes on this region, we're trying to get more feet on the street, and frankly, for three things. We want to get more risk capital deployed, we want to get more corporations to get invested with us here, and we want to get more talented individuals to come here, build here, grow here, and create some of those large companies that Jason was talking about. So that is where I come from. I come from the place of marketing and talking about successes and talking about the amazingly great things that are happening in this ecosystem. And I think we have a lot a lot of really, really good stories to share that frankly aren't known globally as much as they can be. This panel is the beginning of the day, and what I want to make sure that we cover here with the panelists who are going to talk about themselves, I'm not going to talk about them at all, I want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to have a couple of words, a couple minutes, let's call it, not a couple words, about their perspective, where they're coming from in the life sciences sector, and what their relationship with the sector is, and the opportunities that they see going forward. We'll then launch into some moderated questions, and then hopefully we'll have lots of great discussion with the audience. We're going to have sweeping conversations from one end of the room to the next in the last 10 minutes of this panel. Yes, everybody is with me? Excellent, fantastic. So I perhaps am going to start with Tom, because Tom has a very broad eagle's eye view on this new government. So please.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for having me on the panel. I should say I don't obviously work in the life sciences sector, but I did cover healthcare for the National Post for more than a decade until a year or so ago, and this year has been it's been a bit of a strange year for me. Sort of, I feel a bit like I have kind of a journalistic version of multiple personality syndrome. I spent actually 5 weeks in Washington covering free trade. I spent the last couple of weeks working on a story related to Edward Snowden. However, I did start the year, or at least from February to July, covering Ontario politics. And as you all know, it was a crazy season in Ontario politics, and started with the leader of the Conservative Party resigning amid sexual impropriety allegations, and then rejoining the race to replace him, and then leaving that race. And then the rest of the Conservative leadership race ended up being, fairly chaotic, and ending with a even more chaotic leadership convention. And the election itself obviously was pretty interesting in a lot of ways. And of course, the end result is I think everyone would agree, a fairly dramatic change in the political leadership of the province. We went from a Liberal Party that I think was from the start fairly free spending party administration, and in its last budget, its last election budget, sort of if anything veered fairly sharply to the left, and promised deficits of $5 or $6 billion for several years, and a multitude of new spending programs. So we went from that to a Doug Ford government, and Doug Ford being the I think the most conservative of the leading leadership candidates that were in the Tory leadership race. So probably we moved as far to the right on the political spectrum as was possible, given the potential conservative leaders and the potential outcomes of the election. So I mean, what does all of this mean? I guess, which is I think the point of this panel. I guess to me, a good sort of illustration of where this government is coming from came in an interview I did with Doug Ford a couple of days after he won the leadership. This is back in March, but I think some of the stuff that he told me still applies and is relevant today. And he made one statement in this interview that sort of, I think, kind of encapsulated Doug Ford's and his government's sort of approach to governing. And he said, I don't believe in government being in our lives and dictating how we should live. Let the market dictate instead of letting the government run things. So a pretty sort of classic small government, neoliberal kind of approach. That's certainly the philosophy that he was coming into power with. I guess a different question, though, is what does this mean in terms of practical policies and the implementation of the government's agenda, and that is definitely a lot less clear at this point. And I'll again reference that interview I did several months ago, and I did ask about healthcare, and as you might remember, in the election, the Conservatives promised to cut 4% from the provincial budget, but to do so without actually laying off anybody. And I asked him about applying that 4% reduction to healthcare, and he said the first thing he said is, "I'm not going to reduce it, the health budget. I'm going to make sure we drive more efficiencies with the money we have." And so a little sort of red flag went up, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I said, does that mean you're going to exempt healthcare from the 4% cut? And then he said, no, we're going to make sure we find savings and increase efficiencies. So leaving things, pretty much sort of clear as mud. And I would argue that, 6 months later, we're not much more illuminated in terms of where the government is going with healthcare. It's made a lot of promises in terms of reducing, so-called hallway healthcare and making the system more efficient, but without, to this point, a lot of details. In fact, I would argue we haven't really heard much from Christine Elliott, the health minister, at all. So we have a government that's committed to reducing spending, to bringing the province's finances under control, who doesn't believe that government should play a large role in the economy, which in terms of government spending programs, obviously, that an industry like yours might take advantage of is not great news. On the other hand, there are some, possibly positive sort of signs from this government for your industry. And amongst those is the fact that, of course, that this is a government committed to reducing regulation and red tape. And also, interestingly, in terms of healthcare, although, again, there are plans for making the system work better and be more efficient and do more with less, so to speak, is still vague. But Doug Ford has repeatedly talked about the importance of using technology and innovation to drive efficiencies. He has, of course, appointed Ruben Devlin to be the head of his health policy sort of task force. Ruben Devlin headed the Humber River Hospital, which in its new incarnation is billed as the first fully digital hospital in North America, and it's full of things like robots delivering medication and touch screens at the bedside and that kind of thing. And Doug Ford has certainly repeatedly referred to that kind of model as one that could be applied somehow more widely in healthcare to drive efficiency. So there seems to be a propensity to look to innovation and technology to improve the health sector. Again, there is this commitment to reducing regulation, and we've yet to see exactly what that's going to mean. But again, for industry, I would think that would be a positive sign. So it seems, on the one hand, there's a commitment to austerity and less government. On the other hand, there is this drive to free things up for industry and let it sort of drive the economy and in healthcare bring about efficiencies or help bring about efficiencies. So it seems like there's both sort of good and bad, I guess, for an industry like yours with this new government.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Interesting. So we started talking about the people, and so I'm actually going to go to Jason now, because Jason's been working with this government and others in the last while. So tell us a bit about the people. Tell us a bit about what do those stakeholders look like now, and what are some of those practices to working with them?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the people because, as you know, this government is for the people. They just keep
Right.
telling you
Yes.
all the time. My name's Jason Lietaer. So my business partner and I, Barb, run a public affairs firm in sort of a national public affairs firm, offices in Toronto and Ottawa, obviously. And with a significant healthcare practice as well, led by Katie Healis, who is here. We disagree every once in a while. Katie's a liberal, I'm a conservative, so putting us together, we sort of maybe have the perfect balance. We've worked for lots of life sciences companies as well over the years. I've been lobbied by life sciences companies when I was with the Ontario government back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then when I was with the Harper government, and then I've been on the other side of those conversations. So anyway, it's exciting to be here. In terms of your question about the people, so we went into this, and we've got some real, sort of intelligence, and also we had a point of view going in. One of the guys in my office, I'm semi-retired from politics now, but one of the guys in my office did Ford's ads during the campaign, and so we had a really good idea of the people that were headed into that office, and we've learned, I think, 7 or 8 things over the last number of months, and I think would be good advice to anybody that's in the room. So I'll just sort of rhyme them off, and then we can talk about what they mean for the sector. First, it's a strong team culture that's very mistrustful of outsiders. I know it might shock you to believe that they might be mistrustful of outsiders, but it turns out they are. Second, and I don't mean this to be pejorative, they use simple language in their communications by design, and they expect people to talk to them in the kinds of language that will be interesting to consumers, the people that they want to talk to, the voters. They expect people to give them solutions that help them talk to voters in the same kind of language that they use. I joke about For the People. Premier Ford got sort of desk stamped signs for all of his cabinet ministers. He handed them out at the first cabinet meeting. He said, sort of, never forget where we came from. So that is one thing that is ingrained in this group of people. Third, they're hyper focused on their priorities and mandate. There might be differing views in this room about Mike Harris and his legacy, but I will say that they look back at his legacy and say, he did what he said he would do. And Harris told Ford himself, and Harris, I helped write one of Harris's last speeches where he said at the time, back in 2002, I wish I wouldn't have stopped moving. I should have kept moving. I stopped moving in my second mandate. I should have kept moving. And Ford's taken that to heart, and it's one of the reasons why you see them sort of making a blizzard of news every day. Is they're really trying to keep moving because it's hard to hit a moving target. Number 4, you got to be a little bit careful with who you align yourself with. So, we all do stakeholder maps, and we look around and we say, yeah, the more people that are on our side, the better. That's not necessarily the case in this new government. You got to have the right people on your side, and if the right people are on your side, or the wrong people are on your side, or on the side of your opponents, you got to be really careful about who you align yourself with. So, I don't think I'd be telling tales out of school to say that there's some ministries in this government that are at loggerheads with the department officials or the ministry officials who advise them. And you got to be very mindful of those dynamics when you're dealing with this government on whether or not the civil service advocating for or against you is a good thing or a bad thing. So it's a very complex sort of 3D chess, discussion usually about whether or not you want this. Where do you want the civil service to be, and how do you get them there? This I think goes without saying, but in the first, we're at sort of the 6-month mark or whatever. You don't challenge a government that's riding high. 15 years in opposition, and there's a bunch of people who are pretty excited about it in there. And so people outside like us, I think, see it, the broader view, but they're still riding high, and you got to let some of that die down before you, if you're going to challenge them on any issue. they are influenced and staffed by Harper-era veterans. So I ran Stephen Harper's War Rooms in 2008 and 2011. I can tell you that at the very senior level, up to the principal secretary, who's Jenny Byrne, down to the most junior level, drivers and interns, there are people who were around Ottawa. There's there's this weird mix of there's the Harperites, which is probably 40-50%. Then there's the Ford Nation staffers, which are like sort of 30 to 40%, and then there's sort of a mix of former Queen's Park Tories. So you got to actually know who you're talking to and where they come from. But if you think about the Harper approach, which was strategic for sure, his strategy long term was make the Conservative Party a viable alternative to the Liberals, and possibly at least an alternative to Canada's natural governing party. He was very tactical as well. For making incremental progress. So he wanted to make incremental progress. No grand strategies, no big sort of ideas. Every single day we make slight progress, and I think the Ford team has taken that to heart as well. Two more. Research and public opinion. Most Conservative governments don't trust their gut. They don't really trust public opinion, or they aren't into the field as much as Liberals, frankly. That is not true with this government. This government is very much in tune. It was, lots of campaigns, for example. The only people that have access to the data are the top 2 or 3 people, the department heads, the director of communication, and the top 2 or 3 campaign strategists. Not so in this campaign, the Ford Nation campaign. They were briefing even their lowly interns on what language was working, what language wasn't working throughout the entire campaign, and that has moved on to government as well. Now, you don't have the same kind of resources for polling and research during when you're governing, but they do have an adherence to public opinion and tracking. It's one of the reasons why when they're offside on something, you do see the odd U-turn or the odd course correction. The last thing I'll say is that many voices matter. So this is a premier who gives out his cell phone number at rallies. So think about that for a second. He's standing in front of 1,000 LIUNA union members at Queen's Park, and he belts out his cell phone and says, if you want to text me, just give me a text or give me a call. He called francophones who called him, who had his phone number has been published online plenty of times, and who called him to complain. He called them back. It made a news story. It wasn't maybe the best move in the world, but he called them back. So, and he's not one of these guys who sort of sits in the ivory tower as staff come to him, brief him, and then they go away. He is out and about. He's constantly pushing them for more events, more time. He wants to see people. He's essentially, but the one thing that him and John Tory have in common is their relentless work ethic. And, you might think that you've got it nailed down, but I got to tell you, he will take a cell phone call from one of your opponents or another friend and that kind of stuff, and you never really know. Sort of what's coming next. So when I add sort of all those up, and I think I think it's good frame or context for anybody that's working with the government. I try to think about some of the opportunities and threats that you guys have. So I looked at your policy documents. Basically they talk about capital, talent, and innovation, and when I look at the opportunities, I see 3 or 4 obvious ones. Number one, GM was mentioned earlier. You guys are what, 40 or 50 GM plants, right? Altogether, I don't know, 80,000 people, 90,000 people, 100,000, 150,000, whatever it is. GM's a couple thousand workers in Oshawa. So when you put that into perspective, and I'm not suggesting that you talk like that, but there is significance in terms of they are all about jobs in the economy. Literally, if Doug Ford does not deliver a decent economy and jobs, he will not be reelected. That's their sort of going in proposition. And you guys are obviously one of the sectors who has opportunity right in front of them, where it's not sort of this difficult, sort of the auto industry. Well, how do you fix the auto industry? You're just managing a downturn. How do you fix? You don't have to fix your industry. You actually just have to expand it. The other thing is you are a significant manufacturing operation, but you're a manufacturing operation that is not on the decline, which is something that is something of a surprise to most government officials in my experience over time. So something that should be should be featured as well. The other thing I would say, and I'll get to this on the threat side, but this government, we could talk all day about who are the power players here, but Mr. Smith and Mr. Fedeli are people that you need to get to know very well. And I've found both of them to be very responsive, smart guys, and some history with the sector and with politics, so they are quite approachable. Second, we talked about, a couple of times red tape's been mentioned. I'll tell you the story. I was at the PC Party Out of convention last week in Etobicoke near the airport. I was standing there talking with the policy director for the Premier for at least 30 minutes. You can imagine what we were talking about. Of course, it was beer. And beer policy. But at the end, we got to talking about an agricultural group that I do some work for, and they said, and he was reminding me, number one, we don't have any money. Number two, we have an insatiable appetite for getting rid of red tape. Number three, it can be done very quickly. Like if you come to me with a proposal on Wednesday, I take it, I gazette it, it's done in 2 weeks. We don't have to wait for the next, so the Ford team wants to move really, really quickly on this stuff. And I know that regulatory red tape and commercialization, all that kind of stuff, there's barriers to getting stuff to market. So I would say that is an area where you should focus your attention. Number three, I heard Jason use these words, so using their language again. You actually can use their language. Hallway medicine, open for business. I heard these things earlier this morning, and you can be one of those stakeholders that actually uses the same kind of language as them and is on their side. And I think the challenge there is that they might not think that you're traditionally on their side. When you say the word life sciences, you don't think Doug Ford. So, the question is, how do you make sure that they understand that there is alignment there? And the fourth opportunity that I see that's sort of staring us in the face is on the agricultural side. You've got a government that is got a different orientation than the last government, and I don't mean that. They are rural, not urban. They are a powerful rural caucus, and the agricultural life sciences, which you might not have featured as an organization up until now, I think is something that you should think about now. Just before I pass it over here, I had 3 issues and threats that I want to make clear here. Number 1, there is no money. Number 2, there's no money. Number 3, there is no money. So
what's that again? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So now this doesn't mean changing how you talk, what you ask for, or what you talk about. Normally, when a government changes, you don't change what you do. You change what you feature. You change how you talk about the things that you want. So I'm offering up advice on how to change the language, and I'm also offering up. There's no reason. There is no opportunity to ask these guys for money in the first year or 2 of this mandate. Now, think back to Mike Harris, right? Mike Harris. 1995 and 1996, horrible budgets for those that were coming to ask for money. 1997, 1998, 1999, some of the best times to be in Ontario to go ask for money. Mike Harris increased spending $10 billion over those 3 years in a very, very short period of time. Created the Myers Discovery District. They were spending money in 1998 and 1999 like drunken sailors. So I think you can expect the same kind of governments think about this differently when they are just elected and then when they are reelected, depending on how their fiscal circumstances. So just have some patience in terms of the ask. And I'll tell you one more anecdote on that. I was talking to the chief of staff who said to me, you've seen the kinds of audits that we've put ourselves through and we're putting through the civil service through. Anybody that comes and asks us for money better be able to prove to us that they are using our money efficiently and that they have put themselves through the same kind of rigor that we have put ourselves through. So that's an anecdote from a chief of staff in a grant funding sort of ministry, and I think it's something that you can take to the bank. Second threat, misalignment in government. You talked about Dr. Devlin. This government is very new. It's getting on their feet. I would argue, the Trudeau government in Ottawa has been in power for 3.5 years, and as an operational concern, it is actually not a very good government. It's actually hard to deal with that government they actually now this government is run by 3 separate tribes of people, sort of throwing themselves together in a number of months, like Tom mentioned. They are still trying to figure out where Christine Elliott fits. Where does Dr. Devlin fit? Is Christine being threatened by Dr. Devlin? How do we use the civil service? All of that kind of stuff. I think one of the real threats here is misalignment in this government, and you got to make sure that you've got the right people talking on your behalf. And the last thing, and this is sort of a joke, but not really. I don't know if you've heard this before, but Doug Ford is mistrustful of elites. So, here we are. We are elites. This room is full of them. And it's not just Doug Ford, it's throughout that caucus. So in terms of your branding and your positioning, that is an existential threat, I would say, to success on the government relations side for any group, is to be you're either in the for them column or the against them column at some point in the next number of years. And you got to be in the for them column. So I'll stop there.
Wow.
And
That's a lot to chew on, Jason. Thanks.
Yeah.
And that's just the opener. Huh? So, Ashley, I'm joking. That was great. So, the OCC has been doing a lot of work in the health sector and life sciences sector over the past number of years. How do you see this open for business mandate?
Well, I mean, I'll say seconded to everything Jason said, including a lot of his advice about this government, and I've heard very similar things from them as well. But I'll just to back up for a second. So the OCC has been only a player in this space for a fairly short period of time. 3 years ago, our then president came to me and said, "Hey, we don't do anything in health policy. You should do something." And little did I know that 3 years later, I would see some of you more than I see my own family. So we've taken to it quite well. But our perspective, and I think we probably have a bit of a reputation, especially over the past few years, of being fairly negative about the economic environment in Ontario, about the business environment in Ontario, competitiveness issues, red tape issues, taxation, lack of investment in key infrastructure, lack of coordination and trust with government. But that's something that I think we need to change, both as an organization, but also as a business community, in part because open for business is a very positive statement. And we know that there are plenty of opportunities here in Ontario. And we also know, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, what the barriers to those opportunities are. So that work has been done, and now we are in an environment where theoretically, if we get our message aligned, we can make a lot of progress under this banner of open for business. So, thinking about what that means from a life science sector perspective, obviously there's a lot of interconnected issues between parts of the sector and their potential, and then what we would need from government in order to act on that potential, or what those parts of the sector could actually contribute to public services and quality of life in Ontario. So, the life science sector can absolutely have a narrative about economic growth and about job creation, but it can also have a narrative that connects what you're able to present to government that fixes some of their problems. So the biggest one, of course, is healthcare system reform. We know they're interested in this. It's been kind of quiet and a little slow going with respect to the Ministry of Health, but I think we've heard some very comforting or even exciting things from some of the key players there. But also thinking about other parts of the sector. So agriculture and agri-food, huge opportunity in Ontario, just massive. From everything from the traditional crops to cannabis to alcohol and food tourism. But this is something that I don't think the government quite appreciates the high technology side or how modern this sector is, and how some of the solutions that this sector needs are things like improved broadband internet access or better talent pipelines. So coming to them with a perspective that isn't just asking for money, but creating those connections between, for example, green tech and whatever plan they're going to release on December 1st to replace cap and trade. Show them that there's more to traditional sectors than they thought, and more to offer them from your sector. You know, that piece about the elites that Jason mentioned is unfortunately very critical, but I think there is still opportunity there as well. Life sciences is a sector that isn't entirely contained within the city of Toronto or the Greater Toronto Area. It's truly a pan-provincial sector, and it's a sector that I think is quite key to regional economic development. So if you're able to talk to this government from a regional perspective or with regional voices, I think you'll probably find that there's a bit more uptake in terms of giving into your asks or collaborating with you more. So, you know, talking about something like the chemical cluster out in Sarnia, not a lot of people are talking about that. Talking about the importance of, the growing importance of health centers in places like Thunder Bay. Talking about the incredible potential in the Niagara region when it comes to cannabis, and the incredible potential in both Niagara and Prince Edward County when it comes to agri-food generally. Not to you know, dismiss the incredibly powerful health and life science cluster here in Toronto and in the Greater Toronto Area and in KW and in Hamilton, but changing that message from one about this is an already powerful machine in the GTA to this is a powerful machine across Ontario, and this is a machine that has the potential to create even more power across Ontario. I think that's very critical, and something that we plan to work on in 2019 is regional economic development work and the interconnected policy issues related to that. So obviously infrastructure, especially digital infrastructure, talent pipelines, and looking at those sectors that are underappreciated when it comes to their contribution to the Ontario economy, and life sciences is absolutely number one on top of that list.
Excellent. Thanks, Ashley. So, Michelle, I left you the hardest job, going last, and also representing the great central elites of the healthcare sector. Because I know CAHO advocates for research hospitals that create both healthcare and treat patients, but also do research and create wealth. So, go ahead, please.
Absolutely, that is definitely one of the challenges that we face. If you were to look up elites, you would find academic hospitals very high on the list. So I represent an organization called the Council of Academic Hospitals of Ontario. We're the association that represents the province's 23 academic hospitals. So hospitals like University Health Network, Sick Kids, Thunder Bay Regional Healthcare Center, the Ottawa Hospital. You know sort of the type I'm talking about. Now, academic hospitals play a really unique role in our healthcare system. They're your last port of call when it comes to care. If everything else fails at a community level, you're going to end up at one of my member hospitals. And in some cases, they're not just providing care for Ontarians. There are, in many cases, people that get sent across the country to these hospitals. They also train the vast majority of healthcare workers. If you look at, even with distributive medical education, something like 89% of all medical trainee days are in my member hospital organizations. And in the specialties and subspecialties, they're almost exclusively in my member hospitals. But another huge component is the research that's driven through my member hospitals. We represent 19 of the top 40 research hospitals across the country, 6 of the top 10. But one of the things that's really interesting, we have a unique model in Ontario. We still have locally governed hospitals. Most of the rest of the country has moved to regional and provincial healthcare authorities. And if you look at what that's done on the research side, overall it's meant less research happening in those hospitals. So collectively, CAHO hospitals invest about $1.5 billion in research. So that's a combination of grant money, but also a huge amount of industry dollars and also an incredible amount of private philanthropy. It's the hospitals, actually their largest source of funding comes through philanthropy. And that is actually people donating money to foundations that gets invested in research that we all benefit from. And it's really interesting, sort of that interwoven nature of a hospital that's successful in getting grant because they have amazing researchers is able to modify or to multiply that investment with philanthropic investment and industry investment. And guess what? They're a partner to all of you. I bet anyone in here who is trying to work on any type of technology is working with one of my member organizations. So critical role. So why does all that matter? So we're at a time where we know this government is very interested in fixing healthcare. Guess what? We all know there are fundamental problems in the healthcare system. The challenge is, how do you do that in an austerity environment? Other provinces have moved to regional health authorities, provincial health authorities. Do we want that? Probably not. So for us, it's really important that we talk about what we do as a provincial asset, that we talk about this as a life sciences sector, and how without the role of Academic Health Sciences Centre, especially on the research side, a lot of that is threatened. It becomes a much more difficult environment to work in. So it's something to think about. There's a number of challenges on the healthcare system side in terms of how things are structured, how things are misaligned. They're starting to make some changes on actually restructuring the Ministry of Health so that they actually put human resources planning with capital planning, with health system capacity. The fact that that wasn't together as a function in the past, you've got to sort of scratch your head a little bit. And I'm sure a lot of you are excited about the combination of drugs and devices. We don't know yet what that's going to mean. But here's the real shocker, and it's back to what Jason was talking about on the austerity front. There's no money. Well, there's been no money on the healthcare side for a long time. And what that's meant on the hospital side are the conditions that have led to hallway medicine. So hospitals have been, overall, all hospitals, not just my member hospitals, have had freezing in operating budgets for almost a decade, while all of their operating costs went up. So those of you in business know what it's like if you do not increase any of your budgets, but all of your expenses go up. What does that mean? It means you're trying to do more with less. So what that's produced on hospital side of things are huge challenges with capacity. So it's really interesting when you hear about hallway medicine. What does that actually mean? It means if you were to go to Sunnybrook or Mount Sinai, they're probably operating at more than 100% capacity. So think about that. Imagine running your business at 120% capacity. And that's every day. So that's what hallway medicine is. So how do you think about changing the system while you're doing that? So it's a huge challenge, that tension in the system. We also know this government's trying to move very, very quickly. Well, these challenges in the healthcare system are not new problems. They've been around and recognized for many decades, and you can't fundamentally switch them overnight. It's got to be thoughtful. It's got to be an organized process. Everyone wants to partner and be part of change. I think no one is happy with the way the system is functioning now, but we need to make sure that the way forward is thoughtful and is actually going to help us. The other piece where KO is very active is on the research side of things. The ministry that we deal with most closely is not the Ministry of Health. The Ontario Hospital Association, our partner association, is the lead association representing all hospitals and talking with the Ministry of Health. We've historically dealt with the Ministry of Research, Innovation, and Science. Well, guess what? That named ministry no longer exists. Its functions have been absorbed into the new Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation, and Trade, which up until recently was pretty much known as the Ministry of Trade. It's become more focused on economic development and job creation. But our great concern is where innovation, science, and research fit within their mandate and their focus. It's a very important conversation that we have. This is one of the sectors that has the potential to fix two major problems. One, the economic side and the innovation economy and being a real opportunity to drive that. And at the same time, thinking about how that would actually help fix the healthcare system and end hallway medicine. The challenge is, how do we combine those two things? And how do we do it in an environment that's looking to take costs out of the system? So if you look at the provincial budget and you look at where the biggest pots are, one of the biggest pots is hospitals, and one of the biggest components of hospitals is academic hospitals. So one of the things we want to make sure that we do is find the way forward that actually helps us and helps create a system that we can all work in. And I think looking at the life sciences sector in a different way is a critical piece of that.
Excellent, thank you. So here's what I'm gathering from this. The life sciences sector is really, really, really broad. So how do we do this, panel? How do we talk about the life sciences sector or the life sciences industry in a way that gets us to the final goal, our goal of economic development, of improving healthcare, of driving the agendas of the folks in this room? And who needs to hear that? Who needs to hear that talk? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first because I went last.
Because you went last. Okay, great.
There's a couple of components to this, and it's one of those things. One of the things that I've been sort of kicking around is how much are we challenged by the idea of the life sciences sector as an industry because we're in a system where we don't pay for our health care. So if you think about that, if we can actually talk about healthcare as an industry as well as a service that's free, if we're able to talk about the jobs, and it's important that that's something where we can all work together and talk about the industry from a jobs perspective. And it's one of the things that we've done at CAHO for a number of years is we've tried to actually identify the actual people that are employed within our hospitals through research. And it's about 18,000 people across the province. About 4,000 of those are principal researchers, but that's through the investment that's actually brought in on the research front. And those are not jobs that the government pays for. Those are jobs that are paid for through all of those research grants. And they also have a huge multiplying effect in terms of how they enable all of the other components of the health life sciences sector to prosper. So I think that's an important piece that we start to talk about it from a jobs perspective. I think it's also important that we find ways to make science relatable to people and to be able to bring to life why research matters. So it's about, and unfortunately we can't all go into the labs. We can't all go to UHN and see where they're actually making pacemaker cells, which someday will actually be a transplant in your heart that doesn't involve an actual pacemaker device. But how do we ensure that we're telling those stories about this is discovery that's happening here that people are working to commercialize? So I think it's really important that we think about storytelling and bringing that to life in a way that the people in Tim Hortons in Oshawa can relate to today.
Awesome. I'm going to ask Tom actually to comment. From the public perception side of things, how do we talk about this sector that I think that would resonate, that would make sense?
Well, I mean, in terms of, well, the public or the government, I mean, this government, I think Jason hit the nail on the head by saying that, don't go to this government asking for money or for, new spending programs. I think your best bet is to make proposals that would help them achieve their aims, which is, creating or finding efficiencies, as they repeatedly talk about, but basically sort of doing more with less budget. And so, I mean, if you have a technology or drug that you think, if it's more used more in or better in the system, that will sort of reduce health costs, for instance, I think that's going to fly a lot better than suggesting some kind of new spending program that's going to support your business.
Jason?
I really think you've got good advice from the panel here, and I was just to put a bow on what Tom is saying there. I've been involved in a lot of labor negotiations and on both sides. And one of the labor guys that I work with, he has this question going into any labor negotiation. It's like, is it a money year? Is it or isn't it? Do they have money or don't they? And once you get into that funnel, there's sort of two ways you can go at governments. When they don't have money, they're trying to solve problems. And when they do have money, they're looking for big ideas and or legacies. So they aren't looking for big ideas or legacies. They're looking to solve problems right now. So you got to put yourself in that funnel and be very tactical, I think, in how you talk to them. They are looking for a solution to hallway medicine. They are looking for things that they can do on healthcare that might be useful and might speak to consumers. They are looking for ideas to grow the economy, but tactical, measurable things. Like if you say to them, "We've got a grand strategy," they will stop listening. They will stop listening at that point. Because like a grand strategy sounds like it takes long, it sounds like it's expensive, and it sounds, so you've got to just take the words that you're currently using and sort of fit them in that very tactical sort of box. You just can't get them to shut off immediately, because remember, 99% of the people that go to see Vic Fideli right now are getting shut off. They can't do what they're asking, right? So and a number of you, I'm sure there's people here that have been government officials or at least had people come to them and ask them for money. When you don't have any, it's a frustrating process. It's actually a frustrating process on the other side. But that rare 1% that comes to you and says, "Boy, have I got an idea for you," and it's going to be, you know, that big problem you've got, I'm the solution. That's the kind of meeting that you like to have in the short term. One other thing. You asked, how do you talk to people, or who needs to hear it?
Yeah.
And with great apologies to Tom. Now, Tom writes for the National Post or Post Media, so he's okay, I guess, amongst the Ford Nation people. But I will say, if your strategy is to get the Toronto Star to write an editorial on your behalf, it's the wrong strategy. If it appears as though John Hondrich is your benefactor, you have lost already. So be very careful about who you align yourselves with. They trust what they see on Facebook amongst their own people. They target them online. They don't use media relations in the way that the Trudeau government uses media relations. They have a different communication strategy and a different audience, and you've got to understand, I think, how they use those audience identification tools. Thanks.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize stories and the use of stories here, and we've heard this in places you wouldn't expect. So in discussions about regulatory modernization, stories really have an impact. It's one thing to go and say, you know, this regulation is costing us this much money, or this regulation is preventing us from doing this kind of innovation, and that would create all kinds of great, you know, economic growth or whatever. It's another to have a quirky, memorable story that gets this government's attention and helps them understand exactly how their government is preventing you from being open for business. And I think with respect to messaging and who you need to talk to and how you need to talk to them, I think you need to talk to both the public and this government, and I think you can talk to them in very similar ways. You know, going to both the public and this government and saying, you know, what kind of Ontario do you want? And from those responses, connecting what it is that this sector has to offer. Because I think you'll hear very similar things. Well, I want an Ontario with good jobs. I want an Ontario that is a leader, especially in Canada. You know, I want good quality health care. I want, you know, a strong and healthy environment. And these are all things that the life science sector can deliver on. I'll share an anecdote to support some of what Jason was saying about your channels for messaging. I was in an elevator with an individual from a Ford Nation-friendly media outlet, and she asked me, what's coming up next for the OCC? And this was back in September, and I said, oh, well, we're having this big conference on the life science sector and how it's so important to the Ontario economy and how it can deliver on you know what this government wants. And she turns to my coworker and goes, I don't have to go to that, do I? So messaging is critically important. I learned that the hard way. Yeah, if you can't, oh yeah, brutal. If you can't pitch with a story, if you can't connect it to for the people, to open for business, to that kind of language, you know, as much as it pains me as an independent, thoughtful policy person, you have to find some way to speak their language and to use the channels that they listen to, the people and some media outlets, to convey your stories to them, as well as directly advocating to them yourselves.
Right. Awesome. I love it. This is so great. I think at this point I want to open it up to the audience, because this has been so interesting. I'm writing notes here and learning myself. Questions? Yes. Is there a mic? Yes. There you go, Brian.
Would talking about beer as a making beer as a biochemical process be a useful talking tool?
So yes, and this is something that we've been thinking about, especially since in the fall economic statement, they indicated that they're seriously considering a new approach to alcohol sales and distribution in Ontario. And if you have any connection to alcohol beverage production in Ontario, you know that it's, the taxation alone is insane. The distribution regulations are insane. And so, this is something that we at the OCC, we see some potential for change on. But that's exactly how you'd have to talk about it, right? It's Ontario. Ontarians, deserve to have their cool beer whenever they want it and however they're going to buy it. But slip in there as well, this is also a massive industry, and it's homegrown, and we have a lot of economic potential to unlock. But yeah, start with a story about how delicious beer is, I guess.
I love it. Jason.
One of my favorite examples of biotechnology in action, beer. My question is actually related to this particular government in the context of the current federal government. We've seen that they have been at odds on things like cap and trade, but there's a lot going on federally in life sciences policy, whether it's the modernization of PNPRB or the National Pharmacare Dialogue, and this government's been unusually silent on these topics, particularly given that there are potential budgetary impacts. I'm wondering if the panelists can comment on what your thoughts of why we've had radio silence, or what their thinking is on these topics as they're coming down the pipeline.
That's really interesting. So just generally as a question, the relationship of this government with the federal government, I think, is an interesting one.
The relationship is poor. No, I whatever we've said on this panel, invert it completely. And you guys have been dealing with the Trudeau government for a number of years. They love the exact opposite of everything that the Ford government loves. They love grand strategies. They love big ideas. They love spending money. They're going to continue to do so. It's a very interesting time, actually, to deal with these two beside each other that are literally the exact opposite. Now, their interests are aligned on pharmacare, or at least, some are aligned, right? So Bill Morneau's interests are completely aligned with Doug Ford's interests. Justin Trudeau's office is trying to move some of the people in his caucus to accept that they probably can't do everything that they wanted to do. So it's a very interesting. Ford comes in, it's literally his first thing. The first thing he did was cancel OHIP Plus, and their interests very much align with the bean counters up in the federal government. So it's a very interesting. So they're going to be quiet on that one. For sure. Listen, this is a case-by-case basis. I think the Ford government went into this with the idea of sort of trying to be relatively quiet, and then the carbon tax just got ramped up to nuclear levels, and it's become quite personal between some of the people in the Prime Minister's office and Mr. Ford, and that's going to just continue over the next little bit. So you'll see them cooperate on things. Some of their ministers are cooperating, I know, but the Ford government and they got into a couple of more minor dust-ups they're really got some bitter taste in their mouths on the immigration front between Lisa MacLeod and Minister Hussein. Those are the kinds of things that are sort of bubbling under the surface that are actually going to make it quite difficult to go to both of them. So I think the days of remember back in the 2008, 2009, there was a sort of a détente between Harper and McGuinty, and they worked on infrastructure together for quite some time in order to get both reelected, frankly, and respond to the, you're not going to see that kind of détente, I think, other than on trade and things like GM, things that are just, you can't politicize, you're not going to see that kind of thing. So I think you need a different strategy there, and you need a different strategy in Toronto.
Yeah, we certainly don't want to see even more acrimony between the two governments. The whole carbon pricing thing is especially frustrating because it only worsens the uncertainty for business with respect to what sort of regime they're going to be subject to and how much it's going to cost them. So whether or not we are subject to the federal backstop, that's kind of a big question. And then if the provinces, some of the provinces decide to sue the federal government, that's an even bigger, longer mess that unfortunately business will be the victim of. On pharmacare, we've been doing a lot of work on this, and the response from some corners of the Ontario government has been mystification. They don't quite understand why it's an issue and why it's an issue for them, which is a little frustrating. But given how things are playing out federally, it may not matter. The advisory council and the Trudeau government are in a very different position now than they were when it was formed in March. So it's the potential for it to be as expansive as Hoskins and Trudeau wanted, I think is shrinking by the day. Meaning that the provinces, if they're given anything or if they're presented with any plan at all, will be in a much better position to either reject it or negotiate very hard for something that is closer to the status quo and certainly not on their dime. There are a couple of points where we would like to see increased collaboration with the federal government. Getting the Canada Infrastructure Bank up and really running is a big one for us. So it's a frustrating position to be in right now, to see this, and we're trying to we haven't been very public on it yet, but we don't want to encourage the Ontario government to take any sort of aggressive action against the federal government, because there's much more that needs to be done, and the federal government, frankly, is the one that has the money to do it, because we certainly don't. So we're trying to encourage more collaboration.
And don't forget, there's a federal election next fall. So, and we know that Ontario traditionally is kingmaker on the federal environment, especially the broader GTA. So that's going to play out, and I think it's going to make it even more difficult for them to, on sort of potentially political issues, find a way to work together.
Right,
Yeah.
that'd be interesting to see how it plays out. Andrew, yep.
Hi, Andrew with Clinical Trials Ontario. I recognize that this government is very focused on economic matters and jobs and such, but given the fact that they're for the people, does a patient story type message resonate with this government at all?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely critical to be able to present things with a very patient face. So especially when we talk about research and science and why it matters, and to appeal to those Ford Nation folks, I think it's a critical piece. And also talking about the job side too from a people perspective. So both balancing it, telling stories from a patient perspective, but also putting numbers to the actual job side of things, also important.
I recall doing a story, I guess it must be 2 years ago, when Rob Ford was sick with cancer, and he was enrolled in a trial of a interesting way to test the efficacy of chemotherapy. It basically took pieces of tumor and grew them in mice, and then tested the different chemotherapy regimes on those mice to determine what would be the most effective for that cancer patient. Rob was entered into I think, the first trial in Canada of this idea, and I spoke to Doug Ford about it, and he was like very enthusiastic, and I think he really liked the idea of, a new idea that could make, this form of healthcare sort of more efficient. So, in that sense, I think those kind of stories would sort of resonate with him and perhaps others in his government.
Any more questions on this?
I just want to say one thing about
Oh, sorry.
that one. I think you're bang on, by the way, and that's the kind of communication that I think the panel's encouraging. Doug, he's a complicated fellow. He's actually not what you think. There's a caricature out there of him. Like, he's borderline vegetarian. He doesn't drink. He smokes like a chimney. So he's this complicated sort of guy, and he's a bit of a teddy bear, and he's pretty soft-spoken actually on a day-to-day basis. So and the patient-focused stuff, from my perspective, actually is something that he fundamentally. He's not a neoconservative. He's not even a big C. Like, he's a conservative, but he's actually a customer affairs kind of. He learned from Rob's sort of customer affairs, consumer affairs kind of mayorship, and that's the kind of person that he wants to be. He never wants to lose touch. So when you're talking about, when you talk about big ideas or small ideas, the small ideas, the very tactical, the very specific ideas are the things that actually get him to act, in my experience.
Interesting. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi.
We have to start shifting questions over there after.
I'll send it
Go
this
ahead.
way
Yeah,
after.
yeah.
Two questions for Jason. I just wanted to pick up on the points you made about the fact that there's no money. And just to reassure everyone in the room that the life sciences policy, the strategy that we're putting forward, is based on the fact that you don't need any new spending. It's all there. It exists in different ministries. It just needs a coordinated approach. So the first part of my question is, how do we leverage that with the new government? And the second piece I found very interesting was agriculture. We've done a lot of work at LSO to expand our reach in the agricultural sector and to bring those partners in. It's a large sector. It's very diverse as a subsector of life sciences. So how do we further leverage that? Really would like some free advice while you're sitting up on the panel.
Yeah, it'll be worth what you paid
for our
it.
policy committee.
5
Thank
minutes
you.
or less, Jason.
On the first point, my answer is don't be subtle at all. So groups like this, and long policy papers, lots of words, don't be subtle at all. It's not going to cost you anything. No incremental spend, like blinking lights, red lights. Like, there's not going to be any more money required. We're not asking you for money. Simplicity. Sometimes we are very subtle. We don't think that we are, but we are very subtle. And look at their advertising, look at their communications. It is, sort of bone-jarringly simple, right? They've got the sort of advertising 7 words or less kind of, and if you can't, describe your ask and that kind of stuff. So you do actually have, you're on your front foot, not your back foot. So go on your front foot and attack rather than have the mindset of maybe it's not going to cost. No, it's not going to cost you any money, right? On the second issue on agriculture, I don't want to overstate this. So this requires more than a 10-second answer. So agriculture is a secondary or tertiary ministry in the government of Ontario. And the minister is always a secondary or tertiary minister. So I worked for Ernie Hardeman back in 1999. He's the minister now. I've done some things for him recently. He's a good friend. He's never going to be Todd Smith or Vic Fideli or Rod Phillips. He's never going to be on that P&P committee. So you got to have a strategy that's broader than just working through the minister and the ministry. In the University of Guelph, for example, or Ridgetown College, or whatever sort of research arms that you guys are working together, whether it's a hospital and Alfred College, whatever it is. But you've got to actually get other people interested in it, because agriculture is never going to have the money or the clout to be able to drive something through. And look at what's happened federally, right? A couple of years ago, Dominic Barton comes out with a report that says the way to prosperity in this economy is agri-food. There's untold abilities to grow. The Trudeau government has literally done nothing with it. I mean, they've got a fourth-tier minister who's retiring in charge of agriculture. The minister, Navdeep Bains, hasn't even probably dusted it off since then. So I will say, don't fall into that trap. You actually, if you're going to try and do agriculture, you need a strategy to get it outside of the Minister of Agriculture, the Department of Agriculture, because it's not a ministry that can drive anything through.
Just on the funding piece, one of the things to think about is one of the things we see all the time is there's incredible innovation that can't get purchased within the system. And part of it is not just the lack of funds, but it's how the system has been structured. So it's a very siloed structure. So if you're trying to sell an innovation that's a system-wide improvement, who's going to buy it? It's not a drug, it's not a physician service, and it's not an operational cost in a hospital. Who's your buyer? So it's one of the things that we see all the time. So that's a conversation. I think it's a hard one to have, quite frankly, within the Ministry of Health, but it potentially is one you can have with Treasury Board. So the people who actually think about how we fund things collectively as opposed to how does the system purchase them. Because the system doesn't purchase things. Components of the system purchase things.
I would just quickly add on agriculture. Agriculture is both life sciences and increasingly part of the high-tech sector. And so having a conversation with companies like John Deere might inspire some different thinking on that and different approaches, like Jason said, to this government. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
The whole other. And I'm just gonna look at this side just quickly. Any questions on this side? I feel like I need to. Okay, one more question. Centrally, one more question.
What a wonderful way to start the day. Great panel and great observations. This is maybe not strictly tactical, but picking up on your comment, Michelle, the commitment to Medicare Act, the incredible effort to constrain innovation and efficiency in our healthcare system that was a reflection of the last government. Is there any opportunity for us to really have the necessary discussion about how do we truly transform our healthcare system and achieve efficiencies during the course of the coming years?
I'm probably not the best person to ask or to answer this. I think there's an opportunity to think about different things within the system that have been verboten for the past number of years. So as part of a dialogue, and if you look at different provinces have different definitions around what private services can be offered within the system. There's been ongoing debate about international patients, and we have this tremendous capacity within hospitals that we can't pay to use some of these amazing resources 24 hours a day. And we have people around the world that are attracted to some of the amazing services that are provided by our hospitals. Would there be an opportunity to work with this government to allow that to happen? Providing not only do no Ontario patients wait longer, but it could actually help reduce the cost for those patients. Yeah. But it's not just a matter of allowing hospitals to do that, it's actually encouraging them to do it politically, because it makes it very difficult for hospitals to get into that space without it being a partnership with government. So I think that's a conversation that could and should happen. And there are other things like that. It's also interesting if we were actually to focus on a couple of areas and go deeper. If you look at in other jurisdictions where they've picked things and they've purposely made an effort to own that space, and it's seen as something that not only is not harmful, it's actually beneficial. So if that's a conversation we can find a way to have, I think we all benefit.
And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my favorite subject, procurement. We know this government is interested in procurement reform at a high kind of all government level, but like that's the key to healthcare reform in my opinion. Plus, I think the cherry on top of the sundae is they're likely very open to alternative service delivery ideas as well, and there's 1.5 million of those ideas. And so if the private sector can pay for innovation, well, why
Absolutely.
not, right?
Now, one of the things on the procurement front, it's really funny because I've had this conversation at any one of these events that I've been to. It's always procurement's the barrier. Procurement's the first barrier. It's the funding piece beneath procurement. And we tend to talk about, we label it all as procurement. So it tends to, in this province, become a problem with the BPS guidelines. And the BPS guidelines are actually not the problem. It's misunderstanding of them. We actually did a webinar yesterday because as part of our work as an innovation broker for OCHIS, which is now within the Ministry of Health, we actually identified the BPS guidelines and the misunderstanding of the broader public service procurement guidelines or standards as a barrier. And again, it's not the actual standards themselves, it's what people perceive that they prevent you from doing. So we actually did a webinar which sold out. It's available online, happy to send it to you. But it's not the actual procurement process, it's the idea of procurement. Too often it's used as an excuse to not buy things. And too often it's part of this issue around how we structure what gets bought and how we buy it.
You asked if the debate is verboten. If the debate should be verboten, you should just do it. So you know, if you can imagine how a debate on the Canada Health Act would go between Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau, and you can imagine the position that the federal government would take on that debate against a team of Scott Moe, Brian Pallister, Doug Ford, and possibly Jason Kenney, and you know whoever else gets elected on the provincial side. A debate is a bad idea. Doing it is a good idea. Even the feds might be okay with it as long as they can't be hung on them. I remember McGuinty came to office on a promise to cancel private hospitals. And then literally day 2 was, okay, we're going to alternative funding arrangements now. So, you know, you just got to be careful about how you operate and you just got to do things rather than force a debate. A debate is a bad idea. Doing it is a good idea.
Awesome.
I would say absolutely this government's open to private sector involvement in reforming the healthcare system. And I would also note that the people who are sort of in charge of the Ontario Medical Association now are very much of that mindset as well, and they've for a long time wanted that kind of sort of innovation in the system, so you know they might be people to align with.
I really hate cutting this off. Wow, this has been so interesting. So I'm going to ask the panel for final thought on opportunities for this group going forward, and also setting us up for the rest of the day. What should we continue talking about? Ashley.
So I think the biggest challenge that the life science sector has is a good one, which is there's so many opportunities, and so how do you even start? What do you prioritize? Who do you start talking to? That's probably the first item on your list to tackle, because you do have to go in there with as Jason said, tactical, specific solutions, not asks. But I think that if you put your mind to it with respect to messaging, you've already got the solutions, you've already got the thinking, you already know what you need, what you want, what you can do. That work is done. You just need to figure out how to sell it to this government, and how to find the right collaborators and stakeholders to help you sell it to this government.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, except I just to use a cliche, I would sort of try to be part of the solution, i.e., helping bringing the province's finances under control as opposed to the problem, as this government would see it, which is more spending.
So I agree with all of that, but I'm just going to throw out something else just to be different. One of the things where there's huge, tremendous opportunity is in the tech and digital side of healthcare. And we know that we have the magic combination, especially in the Greater Toronto and Kitchener catchment area, with the combination of tech and with healthcare. And surely, and we know there's been a lot of investment and a lot of focus in that area. And I think there's a huge opportunity if we can figure out how to capitalize on that. A couple of the things that we constantly hear are challenges to that are some of the regulation around privacy and data governance. And that's one where I think working collectively with public, private, and everyone else, if we can put our heads together and actually move that as something that we can actually do something about, I think there's tremendous opportunity there.
Excellent. Jason?
Shouldn't have used all my A material at the beginning.
You only have a few.
A lot of groups like this, and not this one specifically, I'm just saying groups like this miss big directional things, and they focus on the small stuff. And I would say get up to the highest level and remember, similar to what Tom and the team has said, health is a cost center for this government. It's a problem to be managed. The other things that we're talking about up here are opportunities, and you got to be in that opportunities side. If you're in the health side, which is, you know, how are we gonna fix this impossible problem that the Liberals couldn't fix, and Harris, and you know, it's been around for 50 years. If you're in that, you're losing. So there's no way to win that argument. You got to get outside that. I think and I would just say the last thing is be ambitious. I like the advice that you said about technology. Just because the Ford government doesn't have any money and they're more difficult in ways to deal with, they're actually much easier to deal with in other ways than the last government. And you got to, I think, identify those opportunities and be very ambitious. There's no reason for ambition. Just because your language has to be simple doesn't mean you can't be ambitious for the next number of years. That's it.
Fantastic. Well, I just really want to thank this panel for doing such an amazing job first thing in the morning. Thank you so much. I think, so from my perspective, I think this sets us up amazingly well. I think we heard, if we're to now look at the life sciences sector strategy and just stop calling it strategy and call it sector tactics on how to create jobs, I think we probably win, right? I think we have lots to follow up on throughout the day. From TO Health perspective, I would be remiss if I don't mention the fact that we've been working on what we call the cluster asset map. So I'd encourage you throughout the day to visit clusterconnect.ca. We're trying to make sure that everybody knows who each other is in this space, and that's our attempt to do that. Once again, thank you very much to the panel, and I look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella, and thank you to all of our panelists. We're going to break right now for 30 minutes. We're going to come back at 10:40 for our audience engagement session. I want to give a quick plug out to one of our sponsors, University of Toronto Scarborough, and their Arts and Science co-op program. Danny Yu and Miriam Urshad are here. Miriam, raise your hand. And your colleague Danny's here as well. So if you're looking to hire co-op students, they have programs that run throughout the year. Go talk to Danny or Miriam and give a student their start. So we'll break now, back here at 10:40 sharp for the audience engagement session. Should be a lot of fun, so don't miss it.